In this final section on strings, we're going to talk about string iteration, which involves going through a string one character at a time and doing something with that character. In this case, what we'll do is just print it out. In order to do this, we'll have to learn how to access a character at a particular part of the string. So let's take a look at the documentation to see if we can figure it out. Here's the MDN documentation about strings, and this is the kind of thing where you can kind of just scroll down and see. Is there a way to do this? Aha, look at this, right here, character access. So it looks like there's a char at, char at, however you pronounce this. There is a method that does just what we want. So let's go to the official documentation for it. And as usual, there are a bunch of examples. So this is great. We can give an argument to it to get the 0th index. As I mentioned briefly in the last section, the way that you number the characters is what's called 0 offset. So let's take a look at this. We still have a soliloquy variable here. You should retype it if you have since exited Node. So let's look at the first or 0th element. Use a char at. 0 is t, it's the first one there, and then at the first index, which is the second element, o, and so on. So I skipped 2 there because it says t, o. If you want to backtrack 1, it should be just a space like that. All right, now in order to iterate through this soliloquy string, we need to learn how to loop. And the technique I'm going to show you is the standard technique across a huge variety of different languages, but in fact it's not my favorite way to loop in JavaScript, and indeed in general I think it's best to learn how to get away without looping. So we'll be talking about a lot of different techniques about how to do this throughout the rest of this course, and if you look in the text you'll see some forward references to the places where we discuss those. But for now, this is going to be a great way to get started, and then we'll be in a better position to appreciate the other techniques later on. So we'll start with what's called a simple for loop. For, open paren. This is just the way the syntax works. Then we're going to define a variable just for the loop. We'll call it I. Typically, looping variables are short, often things like I, j, k. And as usual in JavaScript, we're going to use let to do the assignment. So let I starts at 0. And then this is just how the syntax works. There's a semicolon, and then you have the upper bound of the loop. I, in this case, I'll say less than 5. And then there's what's called an increment operator, I plus plus. So what this does is it starts I at 0, it increments it each time through the loop, and then it exits once I equals 5. So once I is no longer less than 5. As with the if statement or the if-else conditional, we start with an open curly brace here to start this block of code. And then in here, let's just print this out. And there we go. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when I gets to 5, this condition is false, and so it exits the loop. So as I mentioned, this is a very standard kind of loop. I first learned this kind of loop, I believe, in C. It's also present in C++, Java, Perl, PHP. It's in JavaScript. It's really all over the place. But as mentioned in the text, this is a sort of tedious thing to have to type over and over again. And a friend of mine, Mike Vanier, who's an instructor in computer science at Caltech, wrote an email to Paul Graham, the well-known computer programmer and investor. Mike wrote this tedious repetition of writing this for loop, or just using languages that don't support abstraction, grinds you down after a while. If I had a nickel for every time I've written for I equals 0, I less than n, I plus plus, and C, I'd be a millionaire. So you can see this sort of pattern recurs, and in fact there are nicer ways of going through the different elements of a collection, in this case a collection of characters, and we'll have lots of opportunities to improve on this. But for now, this is a good place to start, so let's actually do the for loop to get through the soliloquy characters. So these are the characters in the soliloquy string. What we're going to do is loop from the beginning to the end of the string. Now, we don't know offhand, just from looking at it, how long it is, because it's pretty long. It's long enough that most people can't just eyeball it, but we can ask JavaScript how long it is. So it's 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So what we can do is something like this. Let's print out the ith character. So this is soliloquy dot char at I. There we go. That worked. Of course, I can combine these two. See what I did here? I asked Node how long the length was, but then just hard-coded it here as the number 42. Instead of doing that, I can just say I less than soliloquy.length. And that works too. Iteration is one of the most common operations in computer programming, so even though this isn't the most elegant start, it's a good start nonetheless.